Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 books that had a significant influence on her life and work is Harvard-trained and published neuroanatomist, public speaker, and author Jill Bolte Taylor, whose extraordinary documentation of her left brain shutting down during a stroke is chronicled in her best-selling book, My Stroke of Insight, The Brain Scientist's Personal Journey, published in 2008. That book remained on the New York Times bestseller list for 63 weeks and led to her being named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world that year. Jill Bolte Taylor, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie. I'm so excited to be with you.
So how does it feel to know that your TED Talk is not only claimed to have single-handedly launched the TED platform into the internet stratosphere, but has now been viewed over 27 million times?
Yeah, it's exciting. You know, we're up to almost 30,000 and 30 million. And you know, it's interesting for me because people who know me, and people who don't know me at all. I'm one of those kinds of people, which is lovely because if I meet someone who does know my work, they know my work, and it's very exciting exchange. And otherwise I get to live a life of anonymity, and it's really, really very pleasant. I'm having a really good time getting to live my life. Pre-stroke, I had a great time. It was a different trajectory. And now post-stroke, a different trajectory, and really very, very lovely. So, you know, life is this beautiful gift, and I became, you know, right in my face how perfect and whole and beautiful we are, regardless of our circumstances.
Mm. Well, I have to say thank you, Jill, because you really took one for the team, and the world knows a lot more now about the brain than it did before.
I like that. I did. I took one for the team, and here we are.
And here we are. So we're going to make a rare exception today with your list, which actually features 4 extra books. Normally, I'm very strict on this, but because you lost your ability to read with a stroke and had to relearn that art all over again, which is something we'll talk about later, you know, it is worth talking about the books before and after. And so there's a few more of them, and they're all important. But let's get on with the first book, which I love the way that you laid it out. Some people do chronological, others don't, but you've actually given us details of the different eras that you were in, your life was in. So the first one, you were in elementary school in the late 60s, and it is the Nancy Drew series by Caroline Keene, first published in 1930, that series.
Yeah. I love that. I love those books. First of all, they're easy to read. To me, how a book appears is really important, how it feels. And there were 55 original books. And what I gained from that collection of books was, you know, Nancy Drew is presented with a clue. And a clue is something you don't know. And you do 2 things with a clue. You either stop and see it as a barrier, or you say, oh, it's a clue, with curiosity, and you pursue more information based on the clue that you've been given. And I just think that this series helped literally millions of little girls and probably little boys approach a clue with curiosity, so that it was like not a blockage, now stop, that's all you're going to know, constrict. Instead it was like, no, pursue, go forward. When there's something you don't know, go forward, go after it. And that certainly, had that impact on me.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really have that series in England when I was growing up. I did love books, but I'm really happy that it was a girl. That they actually portrayed a girl in that role that others, might think should be a boy's role. And I know so many people who love that series. Maybe I should go back and visit it.
I do. I reread that set at least, every decade of my life. I just really enjoy it. The ink is large, the print is large, the ink is strong. They feel great in your hand, and as an adult, I can fly through a book in an hour. And so I still go to the library. I take out about 5. I read them. I go back the next week. I get 5 more. I read them. I love them.
Do you have a favorite?
I don't. What my favorite part of the series, though, is, all the secret places. There's a secret staircase or a secret clue hidden in a book that's on, that shelf, or the shelf, shifts around. I love that stuff. That's the kind of house I wanted to grow up and live in. I didn't, but, it's very exciting.
So book number 2, actually, we don't have one book in number 2. It is several biographies that you were reading in the 5th and 6th grade. You were obsessed with them, weren't you?
For some reason, I became very fascinated with interesting people. And I still remember going where in that library the biographies were and what shelf they were on, and going and looking up Daniel Boone and looking up Abraham Lincoln and looking up, whoever was there. And it didn't matter who it was. I was kind of obsessed with interesting people, and it instilled in me, I want to grow up to be interesting enough person that one day I have a biography. And I don't know, it was just, I don't even remember how many there were, but I remember that was what I was reading when I was in the 5th and 6th grade.
I can really relate to that, because I used to read books about composers and missionaries and people like that. Yeah, I don't know why.
They're interesting, and they're all different. That's the thing about people, is we're all similar and yet different. And, if we've got the pioneers doing the pioneer thing, and I live in Indiana, and it's like, pioneers had to get to Indiana. So I get some history. I get Daniel Boone, and I get what's going on in Kentucky, and that's where my boat is, and I live there. And so I did manage to get some history with that a focus on the biographical life of these people.
For book number 3, we're in your early teens, and My Friends, the Wild Chimpanzees, by English zoologist, primatologist, and anthropologist Dame Jane Morris Goodall.
I had forgotten this book. It's hard to forget Jane, because Jane is still such a fantastic human being. And fortunately, she's still contributing to our wealth of knowledge about life with the wild chimpanzees, and just how to be as human, how to learn. But this book was given to me by one of my mother's best friends, and I was 13 or 14, and I remember reading. I was obsessed with this book, and it was just an introduction to me about how a woman, because this was written when Jane was in her 20s probably, how a woman can kind of go off grid. And I was very introverted. I was very quiet and calm. And how that person can develop a love of something, that she follows that passion regardless of the societal norm. And so I think Jane gave me permission to really be who I grow up to be without just kind of climbing the ladder and following the footsteps of others. And I just and who doesn't love the chimpanzees, you know? So to be exposed to chimpanzee behavior, and because I had this relationship with my brother who would eventually be diagnosed with schizophrenia, I was always observing differences in behavior. So it was kind of a really perfect book at the perfect age for me to see I too could grow up to pursue a passion that is out of the norm for a woman in our society.
Did you ever meet her?
I've never met her. I've never met her. No, I'd love to meet her. I've never met her. Yeah,
Amazing.
she's a true inspiration for me.
Yeah. So, number 4.
Have you met her? Wait, I have to ask. No, you should.
I wish I had. I mean, wow. You know, to do an interview with her would be a dream.
I think you need to send an invitation.
It's a good idea. And
then I think you need to tell her Jill Bolte Taylor would really like to meet you.
We'll do a joint interview.
Oh, that'd be a blast.
Yeah. I'm going to reach out. Let's see what happens. You never know, do you?
Yeah.
Never know. You know, I will say that I didn't think that you would respond when I reached out to you, but you did. So thank you.
Oh, of course. Oh, yeah. Never don't reach out. Yeah, reach out. Give it a try.
Yeah. So now, number 4, we're in your late teens. And for your 17th birthday, you got a gift from your mum, which was Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes, published in 1976.
Do you remember that book?
Not
Origin of Consciousness. So this book I graduated high school in 77. So I was in high school. And this book, and both of my parents are intellectuals. Mom was a mathematician, but she was big brained. And my dad was a psychologist. So when books came out, they were members of book clubs with, their groups. And this was the book. And I became very interested because, again, it was about the brain. And my brother, by this point, is beginning to show real symptoms, not just to me, because I grew up underneath him in age, but to, his peers and my parents. So this was an important book in our family. And it really is about the origin of consciousness. It is about the differences between the two hemispheres and the building of the corpus callosum, where the brain becomes one brain instead of two separate brains that are kind of bringing different functions to life, whatever that life is. So it was a really important book that said to me, anatomy is at the core of the differences in our behaviors. And so and in the same year, I was taking advanced lit. And it was the only teacher that I was terrified of, and that was Valerie O'Rear. And I loved this woman, and she terrified me. I actually wanted to perform academically for her. I wanted to do well. And so she had us write our first over 20-page paper. And she taught us how to write a research paper. And we could pick anything we wanted. And I actually picked the subject of brain death. I don't know why, but it was about when is a person actually dead? And I had become interested in anatomy and cells, and different cells die at different rates. So by the time this Origin of Consciousness book became a real conversation, I was deep into thinking about the brain and enjoying things about the brain.
Do you feel that, this was your destiny?
Oh, yeah. I think if there's an example of that in human life, I'm definitely the right girl, because for that stroke, I was in the right girl in the right place at the right time with the right education, the perfect personal history. And then, and I think that's one reason why I really enjoyed this specific assignment from you, because I hadn't looked at my life as how it had been shaped by the world around me, as well as the world, my family life, to grow up to be who I grew up to be. And then bam, here comes this stroke. And literally, I am the perfectly positioned person to have that specific experience, recover, and then live the life that I've lived since then. So yeah, I've absolutely loved this assignment.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. I'm glad. So, number 5, you're in your late teens and you got an 18th birthday gift from your father. Please Understand Me, Character and Temperament Types by David Keirsey and Marilyn Bates, published in 1978.
Yes, that book literally became my Bible. I called it my Bible, and everywhere I went, my father was a counseling psychologist. He was brought in by management teams to help a board of directors figure out how to work together and develop, prosperous companies instead of destroy one another. And he used temperament typing. And so the first time when this book came out, it really became his Bible. And he typed me it was like every few years. And it was really interesting because as we look at tools to help you decide what are you going to do when you grow up, what actual job are you going to study for, I became an INTJ, for those of your people who know what that means. But it's an introverted, intuitive thinking, judging type of brain, which means I like to work alone. I like to bring information in. I process it through my thinking brain, but I'm not just about the facts. I'm about the intuitive possibilities and then comparing what I learned to everything I've ever learned in the past. And that's the judging piece of it. So I was a scientist. That's called the scientist. And it was like, yeah, that's definitely who I am when I'm at work. But I would say to Dad, but I'm very different from that when I'm in a social environment. I'm the exact opposite. I'm extroverted. I'm SP, sensing, perceiving, which means I am right here in the present moment, having a present moment experience. And I'm about the people. I'm not about the ideas. So I said to Pop, this doesn't really work for me because you're pinholing people into you are an INTJ, and it's like not all the time, so what else could I be? And so Pop and I worked together on the creation of something he called the Taylor indicator, and it took this wisdom of temperament typing and had you at work and had you at play. And that way, then we could kind of recognize what's going on between these two brain hemispheres. And I was all brain anatomy anyway. So my relationship with my father really developed more of my interest in this relationship between psychology of the mind and anatomy of the brain. And, what I learned young is that when you have two intellectual parents and you're going to grow up to be an academic also, you have to pick a field that they know absolutely nothing about, or you will never be the expert. Right. They will always be the expert. Yeah. So I couldn't, when I went to college, I did human psychology, physiological psychology. And then I also majored in human biology. And that's how I got neuroanatomy, because in those days we didn't have neuroanatomy. So I had to have that combination. So I was the psychology of my father, but I took it to the brain. And it was a natural path of growth.
I've never done one of those tests, but reading your book made me decide to go and have a look. And I still haven't worked it out entirely, but it's very interesting.
It is very interesting because, behavior is the output of the cells, and the cells are the output of which other cells are they in relationship with. So we end up with these 4 very specific modules of cells, the 2 emotional and 2 thinking. And that's what the last book that we'll talk about is about, whole brain living.
Mm-hmm. Did your father ever publish this thing that you created together, or was it just, for yourself?
No, as far as I'm aware, I still have a copy of it. But I know companies that he used it with, but as far as I'm aware, no, he did not publish it, and he did not. And I'm kind of glad, because from an anatomical perspective, I kept saying, but it's not just that, Dad. And the way he did it was he took what was the norm and he adapted the norm to what I thought it should be. And it for me, it was a miss. For him, it worked with his people, but for me at an anatomical level, it was a miss, and there was a different, better way of doing it. And so I guess I grew up to ultimately do what I thought I ought to do, and that was whole brain living.
So, book number 6, early college years, Dragons of Eden, Speculations on the Evolution of Human Intelligence, Carl Sagan, published
Carl
in
Sagan, oh my
1977.
gosh, what a mind, right? What a fascinating, brilliant, intuitive, beautiful human being this man was. And the Gardens of Eden in really intelligent life. Oh my gosh. So he blew my mind. And what he showed me was how a scientist can still speculate what we know into what we think we know or what we think we are. And he really, I think, gave me permission to pursue the beautiful when it came to science.
Number 7, in your early 20s, Miss Rumphius by Barbara Cooney, published in, I think, I've seen two dates for when it was published. One is 1982 and one is 1985. So I'm not sure which one is correct. But tell us about this book.
Miss Rumphius. So I think if I had one book, just one book that I could have and hold, it is Miss Rumphius. Because Miss Rumphius is a story about a little girl who has a grandfather, and the grandfather lives by the sea, and he works and lives by the sea, and he bestows his wisdom upon the children. And Miss Rumphius's little girl is told, in your lifetime, there are 3 things that you need to accomplish in order to live a meaningful life. Number 1 is to travel far away, have experiences of other people, other cultures, see how the world is. And so traveling, I think, makes a wonderful contribution to opening our minds to the possibility that what I know in my little environment, there's more to human life and our relationship with this planet than that. So the first one is travel to faraway places. So that's important. The second one is to, and I think I have these out of order, but for me, the second one is to make the world a more beautiful place. So that my contribution, as I am living my life, I am living a life that is focused on beauty and sharing and compassion and openness and bringing the best of what I am as a human being to share with my whoever I'm around. And that making the world a more beautiful place for Miss Rumphius was planting lupine, planting flowers all around the mountains where she lived. And for me, I truly believe making the world a more beautiful place is whole brain living. The last book that I wrote, because it takes what I have gained from all of my life experience and said, we are these magnificently beautiful creatures, all cells, and to be a whole brain person is the ultimate goal. And then the third thing is to find your place by the sea. And finding one's place by the sea, to me, is when you're on the horizon of the water, whether that's a lake, which I live on a boat half the year, but water is a very soothing and calming. There's life there. There's excitement there. There's weather. You're vulnerable to what is the elements. And at the same time, there's this expansiveness of one's self over and across water. So Miss Rumphius really had a powerful impact on, and continues to, on my goals with my life.
I love that. Live by the sea.
Live by the sea. Yeah, you did not know that book. You read that book.
No.
Yeah.
No, I've never heard of that book.
Oh, I love that book. Miss Rumphius. I think it's a great book. If somebody's graduating from whatever age group, 6th grade, elementary or middle school or high school or college, Miss Rumphius is my favorite gift because it's it's a real gift if someone has an open heart, open to receiving.
Number 8. Now we're in your late 20s at graduate school. Netter's Medical Illustrations.
Oh my God.
1986.
Talk about a medical illustrator who makes, cadaver lab come alive, and it's beautiful and it's accurate, and it's like, oh, it is the standard. And I can sit for hours and just look at Netter's anatomy. It is really, truly beautiful. So if you know anybody going into anatomy and physiology or medicine or OT, PT, speech and hearing, where they're going to have to learn anatomy, Netter's illustrated anatomy is beautiful.
That's a first, by the way. First for this book club. I think
I'll bet it is.
5 years. So number 9. This is throughout your 20s. You fell in love with Anne McCaffrey's series about life on the planet Pern. So all of the books in that series occupy the place of number 9.
They do. Anne McCaffrey takes you to a whole new world. And I think it was the first time that I read a book that actually took me to a whole new world. And it showed me the power of fiction and fantasy. And I love this series and her writing. She is such an excellent writer. And the world starts small with your first book, and Dragon Song and Dragon Singer and Dragon Drums. And then off we go into the series of Dragon Flight, Dragon Quest. I mean, it's just a really beautifully done series. And I literally almost every year, this time of year, when I'm in front of a fireplace, that's what I read. I set a fire, or my dog's around, and I go back to that collection of books. Beautiful gift. Beautiful gift. That writer, what a beautiful, beautiful gift to the world. It shifts me completely out of work mode, completely out of intellectual mode, and I go on an adventure. And she takes me on this great adventure in my whole spirit rises to it. I just feel myself lift into that. And I want to ride one of those dragons.
Don't we all?
I don't know. It's like, don't we all, And it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
Okay, so book number 10. In your early 30s, you read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, published in 1988.
My mother handed me this book and she said, have you read this book? And I said, no, I've never read this book. She said, you need to read this book. And I'm thinking, it's a tiny little book. Okay, I'll read that book. So I take the book and I read the book, and I'm reading the book and I'm reading the book, and I'm wondering, why did my mother want me to read this book? Because my mother, again, is an intellectual. She has purpose for everything, every decision she's making. And she knows I'm not much of a reader. So other than my technical, anatomical, neuroanatomical business, research scientist papers, all that, she says, read this book. So I read this book. And when I close this book, I literally start laughing out loud. I think this is like a fantastic message, because you go on a journey. There's a quest, and you go on the quest, and you go on the journey, and you think the journey is supposed to take, the people in there, they want it to take a small amount of time, but they get delayed and they get delayed, and then they get delayed some more, and then they wander here and then they wander there, and then I don't want to ruin the book for the ending for everybody, but by the end, the guy was exactly where he was supposed to be, at the right time, at the right place. And it's just, the message was just let go of trying to control everything and trust that everything's going to end up the way it's supposed to end up, and it'll be good. And that was really reaffirming as I'm, at Harvard, trying to prove myself as the little girl from Indiana who goes to Boston. And, it was just like, lighten up, trust more, enjoy your life, enjoy your time. And you're where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be. So it was a really great book.
Okay, so we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to an OBS Spiritual Book Club interview and sharing the 10 books that had a major influence on her life journey is Harvard-trained and published neuroanatomist Jill Bolte Taylor, author of the New York Times bestselling book, My Stroke of Insight, and the more recently published Whole Brain Living, The Anatomy of Choice and the 4 Characters That Drive Our Life. After the break, 4 more books from Jill and an experience that very, very few people, I would imagine, have ever had, and that is learning to read all over again. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back, Jill Bolte Taylor. So, the 11th book happened after your stroke. Before we talk about it, tell us what it was like to have to learn to read all over again.
Oh, so I had a major hemorrhage in the left half of my brain. And on the morning of the stroke, afternoon of the stroke, I could not walk, talk, read, write, or recall any of my life. So the skill sets of the left hemisphere went offline. And when you look at language, and I had no language. And in fact, I had an absolutely silent brain. I didn't even have that little voice inside that says, hey, you got to pick up bananas tomorrow. The radio was turned off. And when the radio is turned off, all you have is the present moment experience, because you don't have this brain telling you about anything else you know about anywhere else at some other time. It's just all gone. And so that left hemisphere, with the left hemisphere shut down, I became open to simply the present moment. And I felt expansive, and I felt like a big energy ball connected to the universe. So that was my experience with stroke. But the morning of the stroke, I had the opportunity to watch my left hemisphere circuits go offline, skill set by skill set, through the eyes of a neuroanatomist. So what that means is that I visualize a mapping of how all the information is being processed in my brain and at a cellular fiber level, and literally when I went paralyzed, I knew which group of cells that was, where they're located, and then I could begin to understand where the problem was in my particular brain with my specific stroke. So I got to map, if you will, the breakdown of my left hemisphere in order to experience the present moment. So cells are little living creatures. And so our brain is made of these little neurons, and neurons work together in circuits in order to give us skill sets. And when I lost language, language is the sound, dog is a sound, and then another group of cells places meaning on it. And then there's groups of cells that we use for associating, relating letters, and letters are really nothing other than squiggles. And so here I am, big as the universe, just in the present moment. The left hemisphere is organically broken and offline. And my mother is putting in front of me this book. And the book was the Puppy Who Wanted a Boy. And I couldn't read. I didn't know what a puppy was. I didn't know what a P was. I didn't know if a P was a squiggle. And does it matter which orientation that P is in order to be a P? And my mother would say to me, Jill, this is an S. And she'd draw me an S. And she said, this is an S. And it sounds like S. And I looked at her and I thought, I'm the one who's had the stroke. What are you talking about? Now, I didn't think it in that language, but I thought she was nuts. And because, here's an S. Well, if the squiggle goes backwards, is that still an S? Or if it's on an angle or sideways, is it still an S? And it's like, I did not understand. And this is where children begin. It is like the alphabet, and trying to understand the complexity that this abstract symbol makes a sound and has, a life of its own as letters. And we learn this alphabet, and it's this big volume of information for anybody's brain. And it's like almost overload. And then it's like, okay, well, now we're going to put these squiggles together and we're going to make words. And we're going to forget everything that we just learned about the meaning of the alphabet, because that's not what's important. What's important is how they go together. And now they're going to make a word. And then they're going to shift their sounds a little when they make a word. And then the word is what's important and what the word means, not the letters that are making up the word. And it's information on top of information on top of abstract information that has no meaning until we get to the word. And then it's a word, but that's not what's important either. It's now we're going to put a bunch of words together in a certain order, and we're going to be able to read that. And so that's where we learn reading, but it means nothing because I'm all consumed with what is the word, right? What is the word? So word, I read that. We figure out the, and then there's like, here's these letters spelled puppy. Okay, they're puppy. No comprehension of what a puppy is, right? It's all about these letters creating these words. So the level of work that the human brain has to go through at a cellular level simply to read all these abstract, weird symbols that we don't know because humanity has made up reading for the brain. It's like, it is a wonder that any of us can read at all.
Yeah. And none of us remember,
And then we remember, right?
We don't remember having to go through that process to read. We just remember we couldn't read and then we could.
Right. That's right. And And some of us did it early and some of us did it later. And so what do we actually need in order to learn to read? And what does it mean to read? If I can read the puppy who wanted a boy, I kept calling him puppy, puppy, pup, 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 pup. And the boy is Peter, and I kept calling him Petter because PET is a pet, not a P, right? I mean, it's like, what? So learning to read again was, God bless my mother. I mean, that woman had the patience of an angel, and she gave me, because then I'm exhausted, right? I mean, you teach me a few of these abstract letters, that group of cells is swimming in a pool of blood. I have to have brain surgery in order to pull out that blood clot. So it's like, okay, after the surgery, everything that I learned before the surgery, am I going to forget? Well, probably, because I had no language in my brain until a couple of weeks after that surgery. So, I mean, everything in its own timing. And so my greatest message to anybody teaching someone to read is be very, very calm, be very specific. An S is an S. And so it is not this, it is not that, it is this. First of all, they have to definitively know. And I think especially with the way the brain wants to flip things like a D and B, or a P and a Q with dyslexia, can we train the brain originally the specific orientation of these squiggles, because it's a squiggle, before we build it into language? So I think we could do a much better job in helping people learn to read.
For sure. So the next book number 12, was The Right Mind, Making Sense of the Hemispheres, Robert Ornstein, published in 1997.
Robert Ornstein has been a real leader in understanding the differences between the two hemispheres. And the beauty of The Right Mind is making sense of the two hemispheres is he takes us all the way back to essentially cellular level bacteria, or what is genetically the difference between a lemon and a lime, and how this won't make sense to a lot of people, but it just has to do with the way that some of the microscopic pieces of information are organized, either like going to the right or going to the left. They're flipped, a cis or a trans. We use this language more with gender issues now, but cis and trans really goes all the way back down to the cells and how their DNA is organized. And so that's at the level that the difference happens between what's going on in the right hemisphere and what's going on in the left hemisphere in a human, if you take that little piece of information and blow it up. So we end up with these two hemispheres that do process differently. The right hemisphere is like seeking more information and expansion and is more in the present moment, where the left hemisphere shifts it down into more constriction. Take a group of cells, take that information, give it to fewer cells, and then we end up with a more specific detail or fact. So we end up with these two very different ways of perceiving the world with our two brain hemispheres. And the beauty of the right mind, the right brain, and Robert's work, in my opinion, is that it really takes you to the core of the difference in the way these two information machines process information.
Incredible structures.
Critical. Yeah.
So book number 13, a real life-changing book, deserves its place on your list. My Stroke of Insight by you.
Yeah, by me. So, after this amazing, horrendous experience with losing my left hemisphere, and because I became an infant in a woman's body, and that then required 2.5 weeks after the hemorrhage, the surgeons went in and removed a blood clot that was the size of a golf ball. And it was pushing pressure between my two major language centers in my left hemisphere. So I had no language. And as I was walking out after that blood clot was relieved, It was like a radio crackle, crackle, crackle. Oh, I am going to have language come back in. Okay, I guess that's a good thing if I'm going to grow up to be a normal person. So, okay, I'll take that. And on my way out of the hospital, my neurologist, Dr. Ann Young, fantastic woman. I call her the queen of neurology at Harvard Medical School. She said to me, she was always she knew I was wounded and it was her job to protect me. And it wasn't about, oh, these are wrong, these are bad, this is, she's never going to recover. It was, Jill is wounded and we're going to do our best to set her up for success. And on the way out the door, she gave me a big hug and she said to me, Jill, this is the kind of experience that great books are written about. And that's all she said to me. She just planted that seed and it stayed in there somewhere. And it took 8 years for me to rebuild my brain using my knowledge of neuroanatomy, which I still had in my right brain because it thinks in pictures. It's everything in relationship to everything else. It understood those details. It had the picture of the circuits that had gone offline. I had lost everything in that left hemisphere. So it took 8 years for me to consciously rebuild day by day, focus completely every effort I made on what now do I have energy for today? Do I try to rebuild my body and get my body because my right side had been paralyzed? Or do I try to get some kind of a cognitive understanding of what is an S? Right. And I only had so much energy before I had to go to sleep. And so I just documented the timetable. I had an office wall with a big sheet of paper. And it was 4 years before I understood what a 1 was. Numbers were gone, which I think was hilarious because my mother was a college math professor. She didn't see the irony, but I sure did. But I didn't understand what a 1 was. And everyone would say to me, Jill, what's 1 plus 1? And I would think and I'd hunt and I'd go, well, what's a 1? And everybody would go, a 1, a 1, it's everything. And I thought to myself, well, if a 1 is everything, how can you have another 1? It made no sense. Right? Made no sense until that portion of my brain hooked together and said, oh, a one, an abstract number, and a 1 plus 1 now can equal 2. It was 4 years before I could manage 1 plus 1. And so I wrote 1 plus 1 on that board. So I documented the timetable of getting everything back. And I wrote what I could write when I could write it. And in the beginning, within the first few months, I took notes on the morning of the stroke because to me that was so important. If people could watch my own brain deteriorate and break down, it would give them a different perception of their own brain and how their brain is organized. But then I had to wait until I recovered before I could write about the recovery. And my mother actually gave up on my book after 5 years. She stopped asking about it. And it was like, I'd say, Mom, I can't write about it until I've got it back, because there's nothing to say until I get it back. But I kept meticulous, this long board of notes. And then I just sat down one day. It was like, okay, I feel like a solid again. And as a solid, that was the first thing to go, is usually the last thing that you get back. And I felt like a solid, and it's like, okay, I'm back. It's time for me to finish the book. So I wrote the book, I finished the book, and then I had the last few chapters was, well, what did I learn? And I thought I'd earned the liberty of sharing what I felt through the eyes of a scientist who had this profound experience. So the last few chapters were what I thought I had learned. And then that went out into the world. Well, then the TED Talk happened, and that's and then the TED Talk happened, and then Oprah happened, and then Time 100 happened, and I exploded into the world. And I always felt like my stroke of insight is not it missed the mark because people had a reverence for me, but I didn't want people to have a reverence for me. I wanted them to have a reverence for themselves. And it's like, how do I communicate this in a way that people will gain an understanding about the miracle of what they are? And that leads you into your last book.
which is Whole Brain Living, which I am reading right now. The subtitle is The Anatomy of Choice and the Four Characters That Drive Our Life. And believe me, you know, I'm telling everyone I know about this. I'm talking to my daughter-in-law and saying, yes, you definitely are in two different brain places when you are talking to your daughter and when you're talking to your son. Yeah, I'm
Exactly.
becoming one of those people, you know, that you don't want to know.
But you know, the beauty of whole brain living is I figured out how to communicate that we have two emotional systems. Most people think I have one emotional system. I feel what I feel. I'm bouncing around. I have emotional conflict. And the reason why we have emotional conflict is because we have two separate modules of cells, one in each hemisphere, that process information in different ways. And the left hemisphere processes information about me at the center of the universe, which is that left brain where my ego center is. And the right hemisphere doesn't have my ego center. I didn't exist. Well, on the morning of the stroke, that character, Jill Bolte Taylor, brain scientist at Harvard, she died that day, as far as I was concerned, because she was offline in that she was swimming in a pool of blood. And if she didn't come back online, it was like I was still me. But I didn't have her color scheme anymore. I didn't have her knowledge base academically anymore. I didn't have her memories of her life anymore, but I was still alive and I was still present and I was still perfect and whole and beautiful, just the way that I was as this magnificent living creature. I just didn't function like other humans because I didn't have a left brain that allows me to have language, to have the boundaries of where I begin and end, that allows me to fit myself as a biological entity into a social norm that is defined by other humans. So I was still me, but I wasn't me anymore. And then I used my right hemisphere characters to rebuild the skill sets of the left hemisphere characters. And then it was like, boom, all of a sudden the character, that first character one alpha personality, came back online and said, hey, I'm back. Good job, cells. Now I want to be the boss again. And the rest of my brain cells are going, we're really glad we got your skill set back, because we need language. We need to know where we begin and end. We need to fit ourselves into the social norm. But we are now a democracy inside of this head, and we value the bigger picture of humanity. We don't want to make decisions based on me, mine, which are two very different value sets between these two hemispheres. So the whole brain living is I truly believe the greatest gift I will give. It is the beauty that I will bring into the world. And it's kind of like people say, well, why do I want to know about my brain? And it's like, when you can differentiate the four different characters inside of who you are, and you can bring them into conversation with one another through a tool I call the brain huddle, and they actually have this conversation, it's like, then we gain the power to choose moment by moment who and how we want to be in the world. And to me, that's total personal freedom. And I do believe that as a species, human, we have these four groups of cells. They all contribute something beautiful and important to how we progress as humans, as individuals, and as social creatures. And that the ultimate goal of human evolution is to be whole brainness, a knowing of these four characters and the power to choose who and how we want to be. And we get in trouble as society when we get skewed into a very specific group of cells, and then we let the value structure of that specific group of cells in the left brain dictate to all of humanity that we're going to be all about me, the individual, me and mine, linearity. How much do I have? I want more. We're climbing the hierarchy, and it's all these social norms that are not about the collective of humanity. And we make very different decisions when we actually care about our fellow man and what's going on with us as a species and in relation as a species to this beautiful planet that we live on. So that's the last book is Whole Brain Living, The Anatomy of Choice, and the 4 characters that drive our life.
Mm. In a way, it's a bit like parts work, isn't it? I mean, we're looking at the different parts of us that express different aspects, and if we can bring them all together, now we've got access to all of it.
Yes. Yeah, the beauty of parts work is Schwartz was the first person to really bring this concept in. Well, a part of me wants this and a part of me wants that. And but he doesn't do it at an anatomical level. He does do a great job with psychology and I think parts work is great for counseling and for therapy. And whole brain living is not that. Because that's important. But that's really about our relationship with the pain of our past and our trauma, and how to look at that character and recognize the different pieces of it and the different parts of our really character one left hemisphere rational, in order to help heal and fix and to shift the perception. And he does pull in some bigger picture from the right hemisphere thinking about, which is really all about loving and supporting and coming in with unconditional love. To me, the power of the brain, the power of whole brain living, is picture your brain as a combination of neurons and energy. And whenever neurons are working, like if I'm wiggling my right arm, then the energy is in the cells in that motor cortex that are moving my right arm. But if I'm in my pain from the past, and the beauty to me of pain from the past, I mean, just think about it. This brain is capable. There are a group of cells in this left emotional tissue that are capable of stepping out of the consciousness of the present moment. Now, first of all, to me, if you never considered that, you need to consider what a miracle those cells are. Here we are, we're in the present moment. We're processing information in the present moment. That makes sense. Information in, experience of the present moment, information out. But these groups of cells actually step out of the consciousness of the present moment, and they say, we're going to take this information we're receiving nonstop in the present moment, we're going to compare it to every experience we've ever had in our past, because the left hemisphere has linearity across time. So we're going to take this present moment information, compare it to the past, and decide whether or not there is a threat or a danger in the present moment based on our past experience. Wow. I mean, wow. Cells are capable of doing that. But what that means is we are constantly revisiting our pain from the past to determine whether or not the present moment is safe. Well, that's fine if you recognize that the dangers in the present moment are stimulating our past trauma for information, not for a lifestyle. And some of us get caught in that circuitry of constantly comparing everything in the present moment. It's re-stimulating all my past trauma. And now I'm living in my past trauma. And that's not the point of the circuit. The point of circuit is to gain information and say, but in this era, in this age, whether it's a trauma that happened yesterday or 20 years ago, I'm in a different present moment, but I can use that information as a warning that I should heed about the new present. So, we have these magnificent groups of cells, and most of the parts work is about that trauma, that little character 2 part. And the beauty of whole brain living is that I can say, yes, I feel trauma. I feel pain from my past. I feel my grief. I feel anger. I feel anxiety. I feel all these things. But in this moment, I don't want to feel those things. I don't want to do my work right now because I'm like on a train and I need to pay attention because I got to get off at the next stop, and I need to bring my brain back into the present moment. And so when we know the 4 different characters, we can consciously move that energy ball to a different group of cells, character 1, 2, 3, or 4, and live life in the present moment, still valuing that information that I gained from the past.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary book. I mean, thought-provoking doesn't even begin to describe it. Yeah. I'm learning so much from it. And as I said to you before we came on here, it's also relieving me of some guilt, because now I understand, in certain situations, there's another part of my brain that has to come, it's almost existential. It has to take control.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And if we consider that there's 4 of me, there's 4 different characters inside of me, and I have the power to choose which of those characters I want to have come out. Well, let's say that I'm busy. I'm in my character 1 alpha personality. I'm busy. I'm typing. I'm in my office, and a little child comes running in and says, Jill, and I'm like busy, right? And it's like I make a decision in that moment. Honey, I need to finish my thought. I need to finish my thought. I need to finish my thought, right? Let me stay in my character 1 so I can finish my thought, and I finish my sentence, and then it's like, you need to go away, you need to go away, or it's like, okay, sweetie, come here. Right. And as I make those decisions, I'm actually shifting that energy ball into a different part of my brain. And what whole brain living does is it takes a psychological understanding of different personality profiles and places it on the cellular anatomy of the brain in a way that nobody else has done. And Carl Jung is probably the closest to whole brain living on his hero's journey, because the hero's journey says, we're going to start in one part of our brain where I have a life. And then I'm going to be, it goes right back to Nancy Drew, doesn't it? Loops us right back around. Now there's a quest that I can take in order to learn something. And in order to do that, I need to step out of me, the individual, me and mine, and my pain from the past, which is me and mine. But I have to set me aside, my ego cells, which is in that left hemisphere. And I need to say, okay, I'm going to go on a quest now. And it's not about me. And now it becomes about what I'm going to gain from pursuing that journey, pursuing that quest. And so as I settle down my character to fear, oh my God, I'm going to die because you're going to set my ego aside and you're going to go off on this journey, and everything that's me might be threatened or going la, 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 la. And so I have to and quiet the left hemisphere, step out of who I was and what I knew myself to be, and go on this journey, big or small, and have the experience, have a new experience, bring in new insight, bring in new possibility. And then with that learning, I become more or different from what I had been just in my little left hemisphere person that I was. And so now I have new possibility, and I feel more enlightened, and I feel like, oh my gosh, this is bliss. This is the peace that I have been searching for. And I find that peace. And then it's like, okay, well, then what do I do? Because now I'm off in my right hemisphere thinking part of my brain. What do I do? Do I selfishly stay here in this bliss, which is what happened to me with the stroke? Now I'm here, big as the universe, open to all possibility, and that ego is gone and it's set aside. Or do I try to come back and recover and heal so I can bring my own message back to my fellow man about what I have gained, about what Carl Jung considered the unconscious parts of our brain? And I opted, the decision for me was an easy one. It's like, I will exist in peaceful bliss and euphoria when I am dead for all eternity, is my hope. That was my fantasy anyway. That's where I had gone. So I don't need to stay here because I'm still in this body. And if I can get this brain to rebuild itself so I can gain those left hemisphere skills and I can have language again, then I become a part of that social norm again. And then maybe I can make a contribution to that social norm about what I had gained when I'm off from my quest. So there's no question that my hero's journey was this unexpected stroke that whacked off my left hemisphere for a time period, and off I went. And then I made the decision to come back and share. And so that's what I'm doing. And I'm just so grateful that you are allowing me that gift and the insights that I have gained through this particular format of looking at books as tools that have helped shaped who I grew up to be so I could be me. Yeah.
So I'm going to break all the rules now, and we are going to go over time. So anybody who is listening to this as a radio show through On Times, you're going to have to go over to YouTube afterwards to hear the ending, because I've got more to ask you, Jill. You know, I can't imagine, I've never heard about anyone being able to have that experience and then come back and do what you did. How does that make you feel? I mean, this is your life, but do you feel like, wow, what happened to my life? It's become bigger than I could have ever imagined.
You know, it's interesting because I'm still an INTJ in many ways, and I live a pretty isolated life. I live half the year in the woods on a lake with my dogs, and I'm an artist. So I'm even of course I'm in Bloomington, Indiana, which is the limestone mecca of the world, one of them. And so I carve limestone, and it's beautiful to me because I don't go in and say to a stone, I'm going to put this person in there. I say to the stone, who's in there that I can release?
Yes.
And it's a completely intuitive, compelling process, and I love it. It's a delicious experience. I do stained glass. I'm starting to play with watercolors. So I get to live a life of peaceful beauty, really. And then the other half of the year, I live on a boat, an 80-foot river boat on a lake in Kentucky with my dogs. And I'm paddleboarding, and I'm rowing, and I have a hydro bike, and I'm exercising, and friends come to visit, and it's fun. So I'm not out in the world receiving adulations about the life I had lived. I'm not living the life of this famous person. And it's really nice because people either know my work and they recognize me because I'm very recognizable. Either it's usually, the look or the voice, or they don't know me at all, and I get to exist in anonymity. So I just see myself as this is my journey. This is the life I got to live. And, I got to grow up to be one of those people who there will probably be biographies, because it's been a fascinating journey, and it might not be a book, but it's a conversation like this that gets to live on in perpetuity for all time for anybody to see and to hear and to learn and to grow and to say, hey, whole brain living. Oh yeah, I'm going to go look that up.
Would you credit whole brain living for the more creative side of you that has come out since the stroke, or was that a kind of byproduct of the stroke?
I think that when the stroke happened, when I lost the left hemisphere and I lost language, then I lost all the terminology of my science. But my right hemisphere thinks in pictures. And so I was a true anatomist. I cut up brains, so I have a visual understanding of how the brain organizes information. I had to go back and put language on all those tracks and on all those groups of neurons. Before the stroke, I had many years of gross anatomy, cadaver lab. I love cadaver lab because you get to go in and you get to feel the relationships. I know everybody laughs. The relationships between, I could sculpt for you an abdomen after the stroke, but I didn't have any language. I couldn't have put the names on the different parts of the stomach, for example. I had to go back and relearn that after the stroke, after I learned to read, so it was down the road. So I did all that, and I rebuilt the language base of my area of expertise. And then I think, it's just been so many different opportunities. The TED Talk the TED Talk gave me an explosion into the world that gave me, I mean, that book came out in like 31 languages. I got to travel to Hong Kong. I traveled to Antarctica. I loved Scotland. I loved London. And you know, there's Bolton. There's a town over there by Manchester in the UK, which is where the Boltes are, I'm assuming. So, you know, I got to the worldview again. I had to get a new worldview, and my relationship to that. And so all of it really became, I would never, all of that is to say I left a lab because all that was gone and I had to go recover, and that took 8 years. And so it just set me on a completely different trajectory with a different hemisphere that had different values. And so I rebuilt my worldview on the values of the collective whole, and how do I use me in a positive way. So instead of going back to the medical school and teaching X number of medical students every year, it was like, no, I'm clearly on a different path now, and I need to let that ego settle down. Oh my God, I fell off the Harvard ladder. To I am making a contribution to humanity that is completely unique, and it's mine. And whether people love it or they hate it or they want to argue with it or they want to accept it, it's about growth. And either we want to grow personally, and if we do, whole brain living is a fantastic tool for that. And if they just want to read a great memoir, My Stroke of Insight is a fantastic journey into your own brain, because it's not just me. This is about us as humanity and what it's like. So anybody who knows someone who's had a stroke, if you want to better understand the brain and how to approach them lovingly and openly and supportively, you know, it's just a great tool, which is why that book still is often in the first 5 books on stroke sold in the Amazon marketplace. It's really a beautiful journey.
Your dad was a psychologist. I mean, did he get to read the book?
Not whole brain living. He did get to read My Stroke of Insight.
What
Both
did he
my
have
mom
to
and
say?
dad.
Because as a psychologist, it must have really interested him.
As a psychologist, I think that Dad recognized the value of my journey, because essentially I was one of the unique people who my father was the creative, intuitive, compassionate, and my mother was the hardcore intellectual. Usually it's the other way around. So, but we get genetically, I understand, and I'm not a geneticist, but I understand we get our intuition. Girls get their intuition from their fathers. And my father's intuition was huge. So I always had these 2 very different ways of being. And scholastically, I was not academic growing up. My intellectual left brain did not turn on until I was really a sophomore in college, and I was taking anatomy. And my poor mother, the intellect, was, because she was Harvard trained. She was at Harvard Radcliffe for working on her doctorate. So so she kept, you know, my poor mother wondered if I was ever going to become scholastic. Is that left hemisphere ever going to turn on? That's why she was feeding me these books. You know, it's like, think about something, because I was doing music and I was doing art and I was doing sports and I was having a great life, because my brother, who would be diagnosed with schizophrenia, he was the intellectual. And so he was achieving all these intellectual goals, and they could brag about him. And it was like, they didn't have to brag about me because they were bragging about him. So I was free to be a little right brain. And so when I grew up and I finally fell in love with anatomy and then psychology and anatomy in this combination, then scholastically, I became an academic. I actually started studying. So my mother was thrilled, and it was the brain, and we had my brother's brain, and we had my dad in psychology, and we had her in mathematics. And what is mathematics? That was her question. Is mathematics a language? So, you know, that's what I grew up inside of. And it was like, oh, she was really relieved when I finally turned on. And then when I had the stroke, in my perspective, I still had this magnificent right hemisphere. I can do my art. I can do my music. I can grow up to do landscaping. I can still figure out a way to live a life and make an income. And my mother, she just gave up completely on me being a scholastic again because she knew the machine had turned itself off. So yeah, it's just this weird journey that we take along the way.
You've started a non-profit foundation called Brains.
Yeah. Joe Bolte Taylor Brains. This is a tool that I started because I've had two groups come to me who were interested in doing a movie of this experience. And everybody came to me and said, you need to start a not-for-profit. And I said, okay. Because when people find out what you're interested in, they want to be supportive. So, people who have money are always interested in putting their money in positive places to make positive change. And they said, so you need to start a not-for-profit. So I did. And so I am committed and dedicated to educating the public about the beauty of this magnificent organ inside of our heads. People of all ages. I've taught people second for literally 2-year-olds. 2-year-olds understand, they can understand the amygdala and say, Mommy, my amygdala hurts, and take time out because they need to take time out because they need too much overstimulation. So, from 2-year-old up to, the aged population, anybody interested in the brain or understanding the aged brain and what is going on in dementia at a cellular level in a way that we can then interact with these individuals who we love. You have to go to the patient, just like a teacher. You have to go to the level of the student in order to teach them. If they don't have the alphabet, you have to teach them the alphabet. And with dementia, if they don't have a left hemisphere that says, this is who I am, and you are my child, and I don't recognize you anymore, right? Because that part of my brain isn't turned on, then don't worry about that. It's not about that your parent doesn't recognize you. It's that circuitry in their brain is offline, but they're still here. And if you can now get out of your ego and your pain and move into the present moment with that person and have an interaction with that person, then you're going to have a whole lot less anxiety about visiting someone who you love, who it breaks your heart, but they're not in that space. So if we allow ourselves to really accept people for who they are and where they are, we can really take some responsibility for what's going on inside of our own brains and who we show up as in every situation.
Well said. Very well said. So we love getting personal with our guests. So we ask them to give us between 3 and 6 nouns that your friends would use to describe you beyond your job title. Playful, quirky terms that those closest to you might, apply to you, like cupcake connoisseur, ABBA lover, tree hugger, boat lover,
Yeah.
What would yours be?
That's an interesting. You didn't warn me about this. Definitely, water fairy.
Water fairy, that's a good one.
Water fairy. Dog lover. Animal lover. Creature lover. Let's go back to creature lover, because I don't care what the creature is. Creature lover. I would say, and I don't know, this is a phrase, but I'm good with death. All my friends know I'm good with death.
Don't know quite what we would call that, death. Not sure. I'll have to think about that one. What about the brain has to come into it somewhere? Brainiac? I mean, I don't know what that...
yeah. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Brainiac. Yeah, I'm definitely a brainiac. I'm definitely an artist.
Artist.
I'm definitely an artist. That whole part of my and so it's really more of I am a decent and compassionate human being. Whatever that is. I'm a decent and compassionate. I'm a journey woman.
Journey woman.
I'm a journey woman. Yeah.
Right.
And in journey is the journey. Yeah. That's an interesting question. You didn't warn me.
Okay, so finally,
Yeah.
Steve Jobs famously gifted Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda to everyone at his memorial. What book would you choose to gift those attending yours?
Whole Brain Living.
Whole Brain Living.
I'd give them Whole Brain Living. I truly believe Whole Brain Living is a hope for the future of humanity. And I think where we are as a species, decisions are being made that set us on trajectories. And I think Whole Brain Living gives us different options.
Well, we will be exploring whole brain living in greater depth when you join me on an episode of What is Going On. So, viewers can look forward to that. Jill Bolte Taylor, thank you for adding your 10 best influential books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thank you, Sandie, and thank you for letting me break the rules.
It's fun, isn't it?
It is.
So you can learn more about Jill Bolte Taylor's books, A Stroke of Insight and Whole Brain Living, The Anatomy of Choice and the Four Characters That Drive Our Life, and also her Brains Foundation and Whole Brain Art at drjilltaylor.com, and that is Dr. Jill with a J, Taylor.com, where you'll also find free articles, audios and videos, including one on how to become anxiety-free with the 90-second reset technique and how to master the art of brain huddles. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me and au revoir to Jill Bolte Taylor.
Thank you.